All right, hello everybody. I'm Randall Jordan. Today we're going to be taking a look at Linux. As a bit of an aside, I want to talk about my personal qualifications, why I think that I'm qualified to even talk about Linux, which is that, well, I've been using seriously Linux for about 2-3 years now, and I use it in a wide variety of contexts. I have it on my personal laptop, I have it on a virtual machine here alongside Windows as I study for school. You know, I've studied the inner workings of Android, and I understand how Linux ties into Android, and I've used it across, other embedded technologies such as Android. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Pogo plug. The Pogo plug is a little NAS device. It's a little low-powered embedded Linux device, which is it's awesome, really. And the Raspberry Pi, of course. So, just go ahead and go on. Today, we're going to look at the basic who, what, when, where's, and whys of Linux. What is Linux? Who created it? When was it made? Where did it come from? Why was it made in the first place? So we're going to start with what is Linux? That's part one. Okay, anyone tell me what Linux is?
Operating system.
It's an operating system. Anybody else? Well, the first important thing to consider is that Linux is not just Linux. Let me surprise you, because when people say operating system, that's the first thing anybody thinks of. Strictly speaking, this is Linux. Does anybody want to take an attempt at that, at discerning this kernel map, which displays all the inner workings of the kernel itself, that which interacts between the software and the hardware. But we're not going to look at this, luckily. No one has to memorize this. Nobody has to understand all the inner workings of this. If you want to get into Linux kernel development, it doesn't hurt, but let's just go past it. Well, generally, Linux is a Unix-like computer operating system assembled under the model of free and open source software development and distribution. The defining component of Linux is the Linux kernel, which we got to know a little bit too well in the previous slide. But there's more to Linux than just the kernel, as you can see. To gain an idea of what Linux is, it helps to know a bit about Unix, the OS which Linux drew inspiration from, and the GNU. And to explain the penguin, this is Tux the penguin, the mascot of Linux. So Unix is a research OS which was inspired by a previous OS, Multics. Multics was itself a research OS. It was highly ambitious, it was highly secure, required expensive IBM mainframes to run. It was also in a rut as far as development went. Multics introduced many innovations but had many problems. Frustrated by the size and complexity of Multics, but not by the aims, Bell Labs slowly pulled out of the project. This left one programmer there, Ken Thompson. That's the guy on the left with the fantastic facial hair. And there's Dennis Ritchie on the right, with Bell Labs logo. So Thompson had a pet project going on in Multics Lab, a game called Space Travel, which is right there in the middle. This is, using it was not economically sound in terms of running the machine for however long it took to beat level 1 or whatever. So looking for a cheaper alternative, he spotted a spare EEC PDP-7, which is the machine on the right, I'm sorry, on the left. And I don't know how he spotted it. It's a little bit hard to miss, honestly. He began to port space travel to it. As he did, he found himself recreating various parts of Multics around it, usually a file system and a kernel itself, not the Linux kernel, mind you, but its own kernel and utilities and everything that you use, the user uses to work with the machine, the hardware. So eventually found, after getting a more powerful machine, the one on the right, the DEC PDP-11, began working on the real applications for it, and Ken and Dennis Ritchie started setting the name in all caps, at which point it mutated into Unix, which would have been displayed as Unix and just a title case with a capital U and lowercase NIX, Ritchie's formatting. Unix used to be trademarked by Bell Labs itself, but through several historical accidents, it's now controlled by the Open Group, who publishes a single Unix specification It grants use of the trademark to OSs that pass a verification suite based on the SUS. There's the Unix logo there. Many Unix-like OSs, or even descendants of Unix, are not typically Unix, or are not officially Unix. For example, BSD, which we'll talk about soon, while being descended from Unix, as we will once again see, is not Unix with the copyright symbol there. It's not certified, because the developers do not pay for a trademark certification. So not long after the first edition of Unix was published inside Bell Labs, Ken and Dennis started work on making the system portable. In the early 1970s, this was a big deal. Almost all OSs up to that point had been written specifically for the machine that they were going to run on. The idea was to write most of the kernel in a higher level language that could be compiled into code for different machines, then add small bits of machine-dependent code where needed to handle things like interrupts in memory. And the language Dennis invented for the project was called C. I'm sure many of you are familiar with C because, well, after he and Brian Kernighan published a book on it, it became a hit, really, outside of just the laboratory aspect and even outside of the Unix community. You're very likely to find books about C or programming languages based on the C in just about any modern retail book outlet. And let me pull this image up a bit higher. See, this is just like your standard Barnes & Noble. You've got books about C, you've got C#, you've got C++. These are all descended from C, they're all based on C, and they're just recreated to serve a different purpose or a different application of some kind. Got C for Dummies right here. I don't quite know yet how ASP.NET or ASP.NET sounds better. I don't know how it ties into C, but there it is. So the possible portability and ubiquity of an OS is extremely handy, as it can lead to situations like this. In my experience, basically what IT is like. You represent the girl who actually knows what she's doing. Your fellow employees typically represent the kid who doesn't, grab the machine gun and hand it over. And the clients are the routers, of course. Anyway, here, oh, I'm sorry. Actually, that file system, by the way, the 3D file system, that was real. A lot of people thought that was made just for the movie, but here's a modern open source version of it. Yeah, we've got a 3D file system, which makes sense, I suppose, intuitively. I've never used it myself, but yeah, a lot of people were decrying the inaccuracy of the film. No, it's all real. This is called FSN. FSV, and it's based off FSN. So yeah. FSN was the version that she used in the film. Correct. So once Unix was ported to C, Bell Labs started allowing researchers at universities to study its insides. Since the Bell system was still a regulated monopoly at the time, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, and thus couldn't sell computers or operating systems, Bell Labs would give university computer science departments access to the Unix source code for the cost of duplication once they signed a non-disclosure agreement. Berkeley's computer science research group added many new features to the Unix system, eventually creating their own version of Unix called the Berkeley Software Distribution, or BSD. I mentioned BSD earlier. Berkeley put their changes under a license that allowed free distribution and modification. This meant that anyone with a Bell Unix license could use BSD. This is very important. Use it for free if you have a Bell Unix license. Mock, as a kernel, developed at Carnegie Mellon University, originally as a replacement for the kernel and the BSD version of Unix. While Mock itself is no longer in active development, Mock's derivatives are the basis of the modern operating system kernels in Apple's operating systems. Mac OS, iOS, tvOS, and watchOS. That's why I'm bringing this up, is the contemporary example of Apple's operating systems following directly from Unix through BSD. So Bell Labs' last classic version of Unix, it was not their last version, it was the last classic version, whatever that means, called version 7, found its way into many machines not powerful enough to run BSD Unix through ports like Xenix, I suppose that's how it's pronounced, which was licensed by Microsoft, of all people, from AT&T Corporation in the late 1970s. In the mid to late 1980s, Xenix was the most common Unix variant, measured according to the number of machines on which it was installed. So we've got, a nice evoke, Microsoft introducing Xenix and an original installation floppy in 1984, version 1.0, yeah. So Microsoft produced their own Unix distribution back in the 1980s. There was also a full rewrite of Bell Labs' Unix called Minix, aimed at teaching Unix concepts to students and curious hackers that couldn't get a V7 license from Bell. It's actually quite important as you will soon learn. There's the Minix logo. In 1982, AT&T, the Bell Systems parent company, lost a long-running lawsuit with the U.S. Department of Justice and was forced to divest itself of its local telephone service companies. In return, they were allowed to enter the computer industry, and commercializing Unix was at the top of their priorities. They changed the licensing such that various parts of the system were unbundled, making a usable Unix system much more expensive. This annoyed many people, but there was very little anybody could do about it. In the meantime, the Unix group at Bell continued working on the original Unix tree, which eventually became Unix System V, the basis of all of AT&T and its partners' commercial Unix offerings. Most vendors ended up merging it with their own code bases, often based on version 7, I mentioned earlier, and creating their own Unix variants, such as HPUX or Hewlett-Packard Unix, and AIX, which is IBM Unix. So these are some very large, contemporary, well-known names. Hewlett-Packard, everybody knows Hewlett-Packard. They produce their own Unix system. IBM, I'm sure many of you are familiar with IBM. They produce their own Unix. And there's the Unix System V Streams Primer. All right. So this is Richard Stallman. Said around the same time as the previous power slide with AT&T. Around the same time, a researcher at MIT's AI lab named Richard Stallman decided he was fed up with companies founded by ex-AI lab members, which often built upon AI lab software and were expected to be used by the AI lab, hoarding their innovations, preventing sharing of code. His main concerns were that once the source to various parts of an OS were non-free or made unavailable, fixing or improving upon them was impossible, but this could lead to monopoly behavior and rip communities apart. He envisioned a complete operating system where all of the parts were free software, an analogy with free speech. Not free as in free beer, but free as in free speech, is the common way of describing it. And the software could be modified or shared with others at will, but with a caveat that the programming code for the changes had to be shared as well. He called his vision GNU, a recursive acronym for GNU's not Unix. I think some people, I don't know if it's officially pronounced GNU. I'm not going to call it that because I think that sounds silly, but you can pronounce it either GNU, or GNU. He posted a manifesto describing his intentions to Usenet in 1983 and created the Free Software Foundation to oversee the effort. By 1990, the Free Software Foundation would have most of the parts of GNU ready, including a compiler, utilities, libraries, and such, but no kernel to run the system here. As an aside, GNU has been producing their own kernel since 1989, 1990. It's still in development. There's still recent modern updates to it, but it's not stable enough after 20 years that they've just never really caught on with it. So we're going to talk about the GPL just for a quick second, which is the GNU public license. This is how they license the free software and everything. Developers who write software can release it under the terms of the GNU GPL, which I suppose stands for GNU Public License. A little bit redundant by now. It says when they do, it will be free software and stay free software, no matter who changes or distributes the program. We call this copyleft. The software is copyrighted, but instead of using those rights to restrict users like proprietary software does, we use them to ensure that every user has freedom. There's the URL to the GPU version, GNU GPL version 3. There's the URL there. There's the logo for GNU, which is GNU head. I suppose I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's pronounced GNU, but it's a wildebeest. So finally, after all of that, this is Linux. In 1991, a programmer in Helsinki, Finland named Linus Torvalds, who was inspired by Minix, which we mentioned earlier, posted his intent to build a little Unix clone to use that, with some of the work already done. Others agreed to help, and by 1992, Linux, as it was dubbed by one of Linus's helpers, a sort of mix between Linus and Unix. He didn't like that at all, by the way. He said that's going to sound so conceited, but it just caught on. It was maturing quickly by 1992. Linus made the important decision to put the Linux kernel under the same license, and this is very important. He put it under the same license as GNU's tools and utilities, making it attractive to developers who appreciated GNU's stance of free software. Linux grew extremely quickly, and by 1995 had reached version 1.0. And there were already several vendors offering distributions or distros, or fully usable operating systems based around Linux's kernel and GNU at that time. And this answers our previous questions of who created Linux, when was Linux made, why was Linux created in the first place. Linus Torvalds made it. It was made in 1991, and it was made as a hobby, really. I've got a little post to the original post on the Usenet forum, and this is verbatim. The typos are his, not mine. It says, hello everybody out there using Linux. I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU, which, little did he know. For 386, 46, 18 clones. This has been brewing since April and starting to get ready. If like any feedback on things people like or dislike in Linux, as my operating system resembles it somewhat. I've currently imported Bash and GCC, the GNU compiler collection, which is GNU's toolkit, which allows you to compile software from code. These things seem to work. And he's just looking for feedback. And it is not protable or portable, is what he means. And it will probably never support anything other than AT hard disk, as that's all I have, frowny face. Little did he know, now we're in 2016, and here we are now. It says, while not originally designed to be portable, Linux is now one of the most widely ported operating system kernels, running on a diverse range of systems from the ARM architecture, which is probably what we have in all of our smartphones, if anybody has their smartphone with them. Anybody? With the phone? You got your phone? All right, go ahead and bust them out. We'll use them in a second here. From the ARM architecture to IBM Z architecture mainframe computers. Linux runs as the main operating system on IBM's Blue Gene and other fastest supercomputers. As of June 2016, 99% of the world's fastest, or 500 fastest supercomputers run some variant of Linux. Linux has also been ported to various handheld devices, such as Apple's iPod and iPhone, I assume without without the support of Apple itself. Some operating systems developed for mobile phones use modified versions of the Linux kernel, such as Google Android. Do your guys' phones run Android? Right, and there's the Linux Foundation logo, which was eventually founded. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but eventually founded, to promote Linux itself. It's an abstract concept, I suppose. So the current development model of the Linux kernel is such that Linus Torvalds makes the releases of new versions, also called the vanilla or mainline kernels, meaning that they contain the main generic branch of development. This branch is officially released as a new version approximately every 10 weeks, after which Torvalds does an initial round of integrating major changes made by all other programmers and several rounds of bug fix pre-releases. As of Linux kernel 4.9, which is the current development release, it's not released as a stable version yet, the kernel code itself contains roughly 21 million lines of code and contains contributions from over 6,000 developers. And this isn't just individuals, this is, the number is probably a lot higher because that includes corporations, such as some distributions of Linux, like Red Hat Linux, which is a big enterprise. And I don't really go into much detail into it here, but currently Red Hat is the most profitable open source enterprise corporation worth about $2 billion right now. So they integrated their changes, their own research and their own development back into the Linux kernel. And if it's good, it gets integrated and everybody gets it. And that's Linus in 2012, a lot better than the 1991 21-year-old geek that he was before. So as an overview, real quick, of everything we just went over, this is a basic tree map. It's not entirely modern. For instance, the Linux kernel goes up to 4.3 there. We're at 4.9. I'd say this is about 3 years old, maybe. So we've got the research Unix at the very beginning in the orange. We've got the branching off from BSD to Sun OS to the recent open source versions of FreeBSD and NetBSD, and that forked off from that is OpenBSD. And I don't go into detail about those that much, but they exist. And you see you've got OS X and Darwin, which, as you can see, the arrows go back into it. It's because they're still updating Darwin. And it was open source at one point, and I think it still is, but there was more of an effort by Apple to produce a free open source variant of Darwin. I think it was called Open Darwin. And there is a modern implementation called Pure Darwin, but last I checked, it hasn't been updated in about a year, which, in terms of Linux development, that's no time at all. It can be updated any minute now. So, and then you've got the GNU. Well, there's Xenix, top there. Sorry, just above GNU. You've got GNU, and from that you've got GNU Herd, which I mentioned. That's the kernel that hasn't really taken off. You've got Linux itself. You've got Minix, which is still in development, and it's been ported to a lot of things as well, but not nearly as much as Linux has. And you've got the commercial versions, which I mentioned earlier. Solaris, I'm sure you've heard about that. I don't go into detail about it here, but it's owned by Sun Oracle, who produces Java, I think it is. They also produce VirtualBox, which I'm running right now. HP UX, AIX, and Iris, which I don't mention at all in this PowerPoint. That's a basic overview of how things went down. So part 2. This is a lot shorter than the first part. What are some contemporary examples of Linux, sorry. Well, I mentioned distributions. And here are some examples of distributions. This is the, last I checked, this is the top 10 of last year. The top 10 most popular distributions as described on the website DistroWatch. I don't know if any of you are familiar with DistroWatch, but they describe current trends and popularity, as well as, hey, here's a new Linux distribution that's released, maybe you want to check it out. It's based on this other one. You know, if you like it, but you wanted some features changed, well, here it is. Somebody's done it for you. So we've got Linux Mint at the top left, Debian, and Ubuntu. Ubuntu is, and now this is in order from most popular to least popular from left to right. So most popular at the top left, least popular at the bottom right of the top 10. This is out of hundreds and hundreds of distributions, so top 10 is pretty good. We got Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu, which is based on Debian. I hope you got that memorized. We got OpenSUSE, which I have not used myself, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. Manjaro Linux, which is based on Arch Linux, and I've used both of those. Those are my personal favorites. My last operating system was Manjaro Linux, and right now I'm running a virtual machine of Arch Linux alongside my Windows operating system, just so that I can work between Windows for school and Linux for the hobbies. Fedora, which is the open source fork of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Fedora is more of a community release, which people develop it, they improve upon it, and then they reintegrate the changes back into Red Hat Linux's code base so that they can, you know, get those good, cool new features. The other blue logo is Zorin, which I have not used at all, honestly, but there it is. Elementary, which has a very fancy logo right there. I haven't used it either, but I've heard great things about it. CentOS, which is a open source fork. Well, not an open source fork. Red Hat Linux is already open source, but this is a fork of Red Hat Linux. So if you are just by yourself, or if you're with a small business, you can use CentOS as an alternative to Red Hat Linux's Grand Enterprise. So it's an enterprise operating system. And Arch Linux. Lastly, I already mentioned that. I love it personally. It's my personal favorite. Let's see. All right. So now, on the left here, we've got Chrome OS, which is based on Gentoo. I'm sure all of you have heard of Chrome OS. It's everywhere. It's Google's operating system for their Chromebooks. And from Debian, you've got Steam OS, which is the operating system that Steam, the video game company, owned by Valve, developed for their Steam machines. And in the center, obviously, we've got Android, which is the most widely recognizable. So right now, Android is the most commonly used type of smartphone. About 9 out of 10 devices use Android right now. This is a map from StatCounter Global Stats of the diversity or the ubiquity of Android devices. You know, in green there's Android, gray is iOS, unknown, and then the bottom we've got Windows Phone. I don't even see the color describing Windows Phone there. Here's some hard numbers for you. About 64.37. This is, from January 2015 to January 2016. That is the current market share, or the, I suppose the market share of Android. Now, for you two who have your Android phone, we can take a look right now to figure out what type of Linux kernel we're running, because Android, all versions of Android have the Linux kernel. Uniquely though, and this is important, they do not have any GNU utilities. They have the Linux kernel, but nothing else from GNU. Because if they carried anything from GNU, they would have to abide by the GNU General Public License, or the GNU Public License. So what it is that they've open sourced Android, and it has the Linux kernel, but they themselves are not abiding by the GNU Public License, and that's fine, you know. But also, Android itself is open source, but the libraries, that is the Google proprietary code, is separate. So you can download and build your own Android operating system, but then you need to download and not compile the Google libraries that allow you to access things like the Play Store and the Google services like Google Music, Google Books, whatever. So that's why GNU doesn't like it, is because it's very proprietary. You know, it's not open source. They do not share the code. So you too, there. If you can go, do you have this sort of page on your phone? This is a screenshot from my own phone. You see right there, kernel version, fourth from the bottom. I'm running kernel version 3.0.101-CM, which stands for CyanogenMod, which is, I think, the most popular open source fork of the main Android operating system. This was built in October, so can you see what kernel you have on yours? Can you read out what it is, the number?
3.10.65 plus.
3.10.65 plus. Okay, so mine is about 6 subunits, however you want to call that, behind yours. What about you?
3.0.31.
That it?
There's a whole list of them. Dash 2104s. 17.
All right. Thank you. So as you can see, like they all seem to be based on version 3. Linux is on version 4.9 now. That'll go up to version 4.10, 4.11 probably. So the reason that we're on version 3 point whatever is because it's so old now. It's still being developed. They don't go to a new version and then forget about the old ones. Is that the companies such as Samsung, and my own phone, which is right here, is a Samsung phone. They want to release versions that are stable and that do not crash your phone or break it or have it set on fire spontaneously, nothing like that. So they release a stable version of it, and this is you can build this. You're able to compile this, but I have personally not seen anything newer than this specific kernel for my specific device, which is a Samsung Galaxy Note 2 with a Verizon carrier, for anybody who is interested. So again, in summary, what is Linux? And well, it's good to listen from Torvalds himself on the similarities between Linux and his other software contribution, Git. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Git. It's awesome. Of course, that kind of segues into something else the kernel and Git do have in common. While I still maintain the kernel, I did end up finding a lot of smart people to maintain all the different parts of it. So while one important work habit is that stick-to-it persistence that you need to really take on a project from a not quite usable prototype to something bigger and better, another important work habit is probably to also let go and try not to own and control the project too much. Let other people really help you. Guide the process, but don't get in their way. And right now that seems to be what he's done. He is heavily invested in it. Linux itself as a name, like it's a combination between Linux and Unix, so he's invested. I don't think he's ever going, it's GNU, for example, they want to call Linux GNU Linux, or GNU/Linux, because when you have a full distribution, it's something like 8 to 9% of the code itself of the entire distribution is the actual kernel. And something between 8 to 13% of the code from GNU, is from GNU, about 8 to 13%, and it varies depending on what type of utilities you're running, because you can have more and you can have less. So GNU wants to call it GNU Linux. Torvald says, yeah, I'm fine with Linux. It doesn't matter. Call it what you want, really, as long as you know that it's not some monolithic Linux. It's a wide, varied thing that's developed by, well, as I say here, Linux is a vast, interconnected project built on the contributions of thousands of dedicated programmers who code because they love coding. I consider myself one of these people. I've personally built and compiled lots of different things for my device, and I will continue to do so. Hopefully my skills will improve, and I'll get to the point where I can build my own Linux kernel, which is something that's well documented and, it's just a hobby with it. So that's what Linux is, but strictly speaking, that's what it is. If any of you want to, once again, take an attempt at that. So you got the Linux kernel at the bottom, and it interacts between the software and the hardware. See that small portion right there? That's Linux. But it's crucial. There's the GNU libraries right on top of that. Not so crucial, but extremely handy. And then after that, you just got just stuff that you can have or do without, like your programs and your web servers and your stuff, the stuff that you use, because you do not interact with the kernel itself. That would be highly dangerous. You interact with utilities, which interact with the kernel, which interacts with the hardware. So you're several levels removed, because they do not want you screwing it up. I don't think you do either. So, I want to end on a quote from Neil Stephenson, science fiction writer, from his essay, In the Beginning Was the Command Line, from January 1999. Windows 95 and Mac OS are products contrived by engineers in the service of specific companies. Unix, by contrast, is not so much a product as it is a painstakingly compiled oral history of the hacker subculture. It is our Gilgamesh epic. What made old epics like Gilgamesh so powerful and so long-lived was that they were living bodies of narrative that many people knew by heart and told over and over again, making their own personal embellishments whenever it struck their fancy. The bad embellishments were shouted down, the good ones picked up by others, polished, improved, and over time incorporated into the story. Likewise, Unix is known, loved, and understood by so many hackers that it can be recreated from scratch, whenever someone needs it. All right? Thank you. Hope you've enjoyed the lecture.